Story 1. I know what a floppy disk is. I remember going to Blockbuster. I remember shopping at Kmart. I remember dial-up internet. I know that I am older than Google. Story 2. Seeing gray hair on people I used to watch on the Disney Channel. Story 3. I am seeing styles come back for a third time. The children of the sports stars I watched are now old enough to be well into their professional careers. Story 4. Having to plan how to get up after getting on my knees or lying on the floor to fix something is frustrating because I know I can fix it but can no longer position my body to do so. Story 5. Almost everything aches and the rest does not work anyway. Story 6. Listening to bands from my youth on the classic rock station. Story 7. Lately I've been thinking about family memories we used to share. I'm now the only one left who remembers the early 1960s, when everyone I knew was still alive. Story 8. Instead of the right knee and the left knee, it is now the good knee and the bad knee. Story 9. In a computer class full of teens watching YouTube videos, I mention Missy Elliott and they all look at me as if I have 3 heads. Story 10. Hearing people talk about the 1960s as if that were a long time ago. Story 11. An elderly man at the pharmacy counter gave his date of birth. He was 2 years younger than I am. Story 12. I was waiting to board a plane when the attendant at the check-in counter asked me if I needed a wheelchair or assistance with boarding. That really made me feel old. Story 13. Watching Major League Baseball and National Hockey League games, I see players who are younger than I am. I am 22. Story 14. I saw Finding Nemo in theaters before my friends were even born. Story 15. At a blood draw lab, I heard an elderly man tell the nurse his birth date, and it's 11 years later than mine. What the heck? Story 16. Apparently taking panning shot videos with my phone makes me show my age. Story 17. In that video, Prince Harry was asked by Hassan Minhaj what he thought about the Charlie XCX and Taylor Swift feud, and I was as confused as he was. Story 18. Looking at the style today, young people wearing skinny jeans and makeup. Pop music with men singing is often called hip-hop. What stands out most is the technology and how these kids use their cell phones for nearly everything. I can barely send an email, yet they use their watches to make payments and have applications for almost every task. Story 19. The fact that a 20-year-old was 10 a decade ago, while I am 30 now. You are not supposed to be 20. You should be going to school, watching cartoons, eating candy, and playing in the mud. You do not have a beard and you are not pregnant. Story 20. Hearing music that was popular when I was in high school playing at the local Applebee's made me notice my prematurely white hair. Story 21. YouTube upload dates. 16 years ago. 19 years ago. Story 22. I scrolled too much to find my birth year. I swear it never took that long. Story 23. 1. The fact that I now judge garden centers by their cafe. 2. The location of toilets is much more important to me than it used to be. Story 24. BRR. Beep beep. KSHKRKRKRK. We. KRKKRK. Sitch. EZZZ KSSHH. Story 25. The year on the sign that reads you must be born after this date to buy alcohol. Story 26. No lie, it was mysterious for too long. I blinked, adjusted my eyes, and then could see my phone. Shitting was fun, and I remembered how to use a rotary phone. Story 27. The first video game I played was Pong, and it was built into the floor model television that weighed 1,000,000 pounds. Story 28. I can't tear open a cereal bag. Are everyday packages generally harder to open? Or am I just getting old? Story 29. When people say late 1900s and they are talking about 1997, I was born in the mid-1900s. Yikes. Story 30. It pains me to realize that we are all teenagers and my friends are unaware of Prince's existence. I have dedicated almost half my life to listening to that man. Story 31. The Nintendo 64 is older than many of my colleagues. The 1990s are to now what the 1960s were to the 1990s. The new Lord of the Rings movies are ancient. My knees hurt once every few months for no reason, and I keep getting surprised by my bald spot when I look down near something reflective. The kids speak differently, and I just find it hilarious and endearing. There are college graduates, whom I still think of as kids. I know how things work where I work better than most. People ask me questions as though I'm wise and listen to my answers. I'm more patient with people who are trying than I used to be, but I have lost all patience for nonsense. I more or less know myself and am happy with who I am, and feel vaguely sad every time I see that someone isn't there yet. I am at peace, except when the computer does what I told it to do instead of what it should have done. Then I get frustrated. Ahem. Peace. Story 32. The distance I have to scroll to find my age on those online forums. Story 33. When I am at my high school's football and basketball games, I sit near the students section. Story 34. I have a perfectly witty remark, but I ask whether my students know what it is before I speak, because otherwise they will not understand. Story 35. My body in general. Laughing out loud. I coach ice sports, and it is incredible to watch what the kids can do. Then I have to figure out what I must do to beat them at it. They are much quicker and have more bursts, so I spend half the time trying to keep up. Once I hit my stride, I take over, but the climb to catch up is brutal. Story 36. I remember stores selling movies on video home system tapes, but not for long. It was already on the way out by then. Story 37. As the saying goes, my body came with terms and conditions I did not agree to. I would like to speak to a manager about my nerves, especially my hips. Story 38. Nobody ever stopped me from watching a video home system tape or a digital versatile disc because of licensing. Story 39. I have back pain, knee pain, shoulder pain, and early hearing loss. Story 40. When I see people I went to high school with, I think they look like they should be my parents' friends. Story 41. I have 2 titanium hip replacements and a knee with severe crepitus. Story 42. I've been watching clips of All in the Family. Archie was my age when the show started. Story 43. When I watch a movie or show and do not recognize anyone. Story 44. Noticing that your favorite albums are turning 20 years old or are even older. Story 45. The feeling that everything is worse now than it used to be. Story 46. Grand Theft Auto. Vice City was released in 2002 and is set in 1986, making the game's setting 16 years earlier than its release. Story 47. It seems like a lot. I remember feeling old at 19. I am now 69. Story 48. Looking old is almost as bad as the aches and pains that come with it. I hate it. Golden years, my ass. Story 49. My back is not cooperating, and I am pissed off. Officially. Story 50. Anything that stresses my left knee causes pain. I tore my anterior cruciate ligament when I was 17. 30 years later, it still hurts or swells when I use the knee. Story 51. I tried lazily to keep up with trends until that one. I just did not give a shit anymore. It was too stupid. Story 52. I heard my 13-year-old nephew say fuck for the first time the other day. He cannot say that. He is just a little boy. Hearing that made me feel 10 years older. Story 53. I'm not that old, but I had an intern and we were chatting about social media. I mentioned how Twitter was really valuable during the Arab Spring. He had no idea what I meant because he was only 5 when it happened. Story 54. Kids, I remember being born, graduating from high school, and graduating from college. Story 55. I have been waking up every day for the last 68 years and 3 months. Story 56. My daughter is turning 39 this month. I was 22 when she was born. I know I am old, but I do not usually think about it unless I consider her age. Story 57. I am 38, and someone in my graduating class is already a grandmother. Story 58. I heard the music I listened to in high school playing in the grocery store. Story 59. When I go to a museum and see my childhood toys on display. Story 60. I know that schools are teaching math differently now. I am 30 years old. Story 61. I do not understand the current brain-rot generative artificial intelligence trends that recur over multiple cycles. Story 62. When I wake up in the morning, I always feel 80 even though I am 42. Story 63. When Austin City Limits is happening, I recognize only about 5 out of 200 artists. Story 64. Professional athletes with birth years starting in 2000. Story 65. Watching children post on vintage subreddits asking how to do the simplest things, such as opening a digital versatile disc snap case. Story 66. Los juegos que jugaba de niño ya van a cumplir entre 10 y 15 años desde que salieron. Story 67. I am 28, and I was reminded recently that my favorite movie, Stardust, released in 2007, is 18 years old. I was a kid when I saw it in theaters. Story 68. Every newly famous person is at least 10 years younger than I am. Story 69. It now takes all night to do what I once could do in an evening. Story 70. I think of a memory and then consider what the world was like much farther back in time. For example, I graduated high school 50 years ago, in 1975. 50 years before that was 1925. The Great Depression, World War II, the Korean War, and the presidency of John F. Kennedy had not yet occurred. I just realized I am now the same age my grandfather was when I graduated. Story 71. The fact that we are a quarter of the way through the 21st century. Story 72. Seeing a new generation use technology one learned only last year. Story 73. I have a shoulder injury and my knee hurts for reasons I do not know. Story 74. Remember when you could smoke in maternity wards, while throwing touchdown passes at the Super Bowl, or even during your own obscenity trial? Boy, we were free back then. Story 75. My birth certificate, which is handwritten with a fountain pen. Story 76. I found out that the kid I did not think was old enough to drive a car was my doctor. Story 77. A few minutes ago I scratched the back of my neck, and a bone in my arm popped so loudly you would have thought my arm had snapped in half. It hurt. Story 78. My favorite decades are the 1980s and 1990s. Story 79. Arthritis in my fingers is new. I feel pretty old about that. Story 80. I was chatting with someone on Grindr a few weeks ago, and we met at a park to see how things went. Neither of us knew each other's ages, so he told me he was 19 and I told him I was 30. That did not faze him. At one point I said that Generation Z humor is superior to millennial humor. I was serious. I genuinely think that. I am a millennial myself, but I have never been very amused by depression memes or avocado toast. During the conversation he mentioned that his parents are millennials, and I said, "Whoa, hold up." I asked, "Didn't you say you were 19? He said yes. I asked how his parents could be millennials and tried to do the math in my head to understand how that could be possible. Turned out his mother was 40, and the math checked out. My parents were 40 when they had me, and they are baby boomers. It still blows my mind to think about. Story 81. I was training a new information technology technician in my department. He tried to plug a digital visual interface cable into the monitor port and it did not fit. After trying both orientations and comparing the connector to the port, he asked what the port was. I told him it was a video graphics array connector and said it was before his time. I then went into my office, sat down, and died inside. Story 82. I am in my early 70s and I truly do not feel old because I keep fit and I work as a cashier at a large grocery chain. I was thinking about all the people I have known in my lifetime. Family, relatives, coworkers, and classmates. So many are gone. This makes me realize I am getting older. But life goes on. Doesn't it? Story 83. Today I couldn't find what I was looking for in a supermarket and just gave up. Story 84. I just heard them playing a song by The Cure in the grocery store today. Story 85. 15 minutes ago I hurt my knee. Yesterday I was singing along to the music at Walmart. Story 86. Any of the new Zoomer logos, Laughing Out Loud, 6 to 7, Ohio, Skibbity, and Giant all drive me crazy, and I guess that is my sign that I am an old lady. Story 87. 1. Arthritis in my lower back and shoulder. 2. Realizing that the 1960s when I was a teenager were 60 years ago. 3. Seeing people in church who look my parents' age and realizing they are probably closer to my age. Story 88. Incredibly sore joints when you sleep wrong when getting up from a chair after shopping at Costco, and when it is cold outside. Story 89. A resolution of 1280 by 720 progressive scan is apparently no longer considered high definition. Story 90. Last night we had trick-or-treaters. We have been in this small, wonderful rural town since 1989. We have always tried to preserve the Halloweens we enjoyed as children. Children can still go door to door here. We were once the young couple. Then young parents told us they loved trick-or-treating at our house. We always had good candy and lots of it. For years we dressed our big dogs in costumes. They loved answering the door. Then we became grandparents. Last night one of them reminded us just how old we have become. We will keep making Halloween special as long as we can. It just takes me longer now to get up and answer the door. Story 91. In this thread, I didn't even know half the things you're talking about existed. Story 92. I am 38. I'm taking a 40-year-old to the hospital who is near the end of life. Could it really end that quickly? I feel I still have so much to do. Story 93. I cannot understand why people like popular music. I just do not get it. Story 94. If they remade Back to the Future today, Marty would go back to the year 1995 when I was in high school. Story 95. The PlayStation 3 is being called retro, and I am not even 18. Story 96. My medical issues began at birth or in early childhood, but they have worsened since I was about 30. I am now 40 and often feel twice my age. Story 97. The players who will be drafted into the National Hockey League in 2026 were born in 2008. I am old enough to be a grandfather. Story 98. When I pull a muscle or tendon, I am out for a couple of days. Story 99. I have to go in to renew my driver's license because I am turning 50. Story 100. I realized I point out things to my passengers while driving and tell them what used to be there, just like my dad. Story 101. Talking to my adult children and watching them have no idea when I refer to something that is apparently before their time. Story 102. People assume I cannot navigate technology. I walked into a doctor's office for an appointment, and the receptionist handed me a paper form to fill out even though the medical practice has used electronic systems for years and I had checked in online. Story 103. My knee, feet, and hips. That's 3 things, I suppose, but I'm old, so I do what I want. Story 104. I, a 26-year-old, made a joke about Marilyn Manson. A 19-year-old looked at me and asked, "Who the fuck is Marilyn Manson?" Story 105. My biggest problem is my hearing. Even though I sometimes wear hearing aids, I still have trouble understanding people in crowded places, and it is frustrating. Story 106. I used to be a white bread person. My 82-year-old client offered me a piece of toast, and all she had was Jewish rye bread, so I tried it and loved it. Story 107. The joints, the crackling of cartilage, and the pain in the muscles. Story 108. Watching commercials from the early 1980s on YouTube is like a warm hug when life is crazy. Story 109. Working with people who were born in the year I graduated from high school. Story 110. I do not know why I want to mention that I am a member of Generation Z, but I am on the older side at 26. I like older mechanical and analog things such as physical media. I try to keep an open mind about new technology, but I do not fully understand it. Story 111. People who use the most recent or most popular slang are ruining society, and they do not even know why. It makes me feel old, so if that is the goal, good job. Story 112. When songs from my teenage years start playing on the throwback playlist. Story 113. A few years ago, I was at my father's house when a young woman came to my door. She asked, "Do you remember me?" It turned out she had been our neighbor when I was a child, and the last time I saw her she was wearing a diaper. After that, thinking about my sister's friends' younger siblings being adults now made me feel old. Story 114. Hearing My Teenage Rebellion music by The Clash being played in the grocery store surprised me. Now I know how my mother felt the first time she heard Elvis playing in a store. Story 115. Seeing the names of players I am familiar with and realizing they are the players' children. Story 116. I have a chronic illness that means I use a mobility aid, and during flares I am an ambulatory wheelchair user. I got used to the judgy "you aren't disabled enough to need that" looks. I hated them, but I got used to them. For the last year or so the judgy looks have stopped. All of a sudden people are being nice. They offer assistance, apologize for being in my way, and say, "Oh no, after you. I can't decide if I like it or not." Story 117, realizing that my little boy is, in fact, a middle-aged man. Story 118, I'm looking at the people I went to high school with on Facebook. Who are all those old people? Story 119, I have legitimate reasons to say back in the day all the time. Story 120, I recently realized that many mainstream actors are my age or younger. Story 121, I'm currently unable to tie my own shoes because of my back. Story 122, when I worked at the self-checkout at Walmart, I was with a group of teenagers. They found a $10 bill and gathered around it laughing. They said they could not believe how old it was because it was from 1976. I replied that 1976 was actually the year I was born. Story 123, my students have never heard of my favorite athletes. I am 30. Story 124, recently, I saw a clip of a kid saying he is 7 years old. Someone asked him when he was born, and he said he was born in 2018, which reminded me that I am legally an adult. Story 125, driving for about an hour and a half is no problem, but when I get out of the car slowly, my body creaks. Yes, I am getting old, but what is the alternative? Story 126, seeing celebrities from my childhood looking so old. Many of them were younger than I am now. Colin Farrell was 26 in Special Weapons and Tactics. Now he looks old and I am 36. Story 127, driving a car with a factory-installed cassette player and cassette tapes to play. Story 128, I am turning 39 in a few weeks. After a divorce, I cared for my mother, who had Parkinson's disease and dementia, until I could no longer. I have noticed that I do not have anyone I feel close to or anyone I look up to. I do not have a personal relationship with someone who could give me advice. Story 129, reading articles, watching videos, or listening to podcasts that say remember when X came out 30 years ago and realizing you were younger then. Story 130, I shake my head at kids who think LeBron James is the greatest player in National Basketball Association history and have never experienced just how psychotic Michael Jordan was in his prime. Story 131, looking at YouTube and seeing videos labeled 20 years ago makes me feel physically sick. Story 132, seeing my high school friend suddenly develop a large bald spot in the center of his head was striking. If he were tall, no one would notice because he still has plenty of hair around it. We are the same age, 25, and I feel sorry that he is the unlucky one in our friend group of 5. Story 133, the face in the mirror, I guess, and my very attractive husband, just existing with not a single gray hair. Story 134, what makes me feel old? I found out the other day that I am older than the Pope. I am still not older than the President or most of Congress, though. Story 135, I am 60 years old and work alongside members of Generation Z and Millennials at a technology company. Story 136, I'm in my 20s and I cringe when people say, ah, or whatever they say these days to avoid using English. I also cringe when I read, ooh, $20 for skin. That's not a bad price. Buddy, $20 used to buy you the whole game. Now it seems to buy everything and you need a whole bank account. Is it even a microtransaction when the average microtransaction is the equivalent of an old AAA game by itself? And don't get me started on cloud services and artificial intelligence. I did my homework on paper. Yes, we had computers, but I preferred to do math on paper. It was easier. Story 137. In the most recent Batman movie, Bruce Wayne's parents are murdered in the early 2000s. Story 138. I get annoyed by post titles such as "Am I cooked?" "Did I cook this?" or "This is cooked." It is just slang and terminology, no different from what I used to say when I was younger, but it makes me feel like such an old cunt because it annoys me so much. Story 139. I laughed out loud reading these comments. Yes, me too. Story 140. I have difficulty squatting or kneeling, and it is even harder to stand back up. Story 141. I know that if I tried to play basketball and jumped for a rebound, my knees would turn to dust on landing. My vertical leap is likely only 2 inches these days. Story 142. I got into an argument with a person in their 20s about both the moon landings and the Challenger disaster being fake. I patiently listened to whatever bullshit the TikTok video told him. Then I told him, okay, read this biography about Apollo by Michael Collins, and we will continue this argument. Who is he? I guess it is better than the answer, I don't read. But what the fuck, man? When did every kid stop knowing the names of the Apollo 11 crew? I am not even going to address Challenger being fake. That is an even dumber argument. Story 143. I see an absolutely beautiful young woman in her 20s and think I hope she finds a nice partner and has a safe, fun time tonight with her friends. Then I feel a little old and wish for more time, energy, and stamina to party and dance with my wife. Story 144. My knees and my back. My 3-year-old neighbor asked if I was my wife's father. Story 145. Young people making YouTube first reaction videos of films I watched at the cinema in the 1980s. That really makes me feel old. Story 146. People 20 years younger than I am react whenever I mention a pop culture reference from before they were born. Story 147. Explaining your experiences to family and others by saying things like, when I was your age, I miss doing those things. Or if I had that much money, I would do that again. My list goes on. Story 148. My newest coworker told me he was taught that Pluto is not a planet. I grew up being taught that there were 9 planets in our solar system. Real Americans will never forget Pluto. Story 149. Working with teenagers or being around them makes me cringe now. Story 150. More great-grandchildren than will fit at the dinner table. Story 151. My knees. Even though I am 19, I have the knees of an 80-year-old. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.